Throughout history, there were many different execution methods deployed in different lands to bring a condemned person's life to an end. In Britain, hanging, drawing and quartering was used against traitors and the most serious of offenders, and inside of France a guillotine was used to take someone's head off in a quick ordeal. But within Spain, there was an execution device known as a garrote, and this was a machine in which someone sat upon, and an iron collar was secured around their neck, and a screw was then driven into the neck, aiming to crush their spine. The garrote was throughout history often performed in public, and the final execution using the device took place in 1974, with Salvador Puig Antich being condemned in Barcelona after being caught up in the death of a police officer. But what happened with his execution led to the garrote being turned against, and his execution did attract a significant amount of criticism. To support our channel, please subscribe. Salvador Puig Antich was born in May 1948 inside of Barcelona, and he was part of the Iberian Liberation Movement. This was a left-wing Spanish group who called for the armed robberies of banks as they wanted to fund their resistance against Francisco Franco, the Spanish dictator. Puig Antich travelled around Europe, and he was known as a prominent anarchist, but in 1973 he went back to Spain to get involved in different activities against the government. However, his group carried out a number of armed robberies in banks inside different cities and towns, but one of them went very wrong. During one robbery in the Calle Garrote in Barcelona, a police inspector was shot and killed during a shootout with the robbers, and with this Salvador Puig Antich was arrested. He was tried in front of a military court and was quickly sentenced to death. There was at the time a huge amount of outcry across Europe about the potential execution, as it was considered a very political act. It's not known whether he fired the shots or not, or whether the execution saw Puig Antich being used as a scapegoat to try and deter other people across Spain from this sort of activity, bank robbery and political dissent. The method of execution used inside of Spain for this sort of execution was the garrote. This was a machine in which a condemned person would be sat on a stool with their back against a wooden post. It was originally intended to replace death by burning, and the later versions of the garrote used an iron collar with a metal screw in the back. The condemned would be strapped to the device, and there would be an executioner stood behind, cranking and turning the wheel, tightening the iron collar, and then a screw would be driven through the neck, pressing on it. The thought with this was that the screw would crush the brainstem and bring the death of someone rather instantly. However, if the screw missed this specific point, it would just bore a hole in the neck, which was excruciating, whilst the iron collar strangled them, causing death to take many more minutes. Now inside of prison, Salvador Puig Antich was subjected to a significant amount of rough treatment, as guards allegedly mocked him and humiliated him and harassed him. He was also beaten inside of prison by a warden who was wielding a baton. But on the 2nd of March 1974, the 25-year-old condemned Salvador Puig Antich was led out from his prison cell into the execution chamber inside of the model prison in Barcelona. The garrote sat in the middle of the chamber, and he was quickly strapped to it, and the collar was secured around his neck. A priest had accompanied him in his final moments, and it was his job to hear the final words. Then the executioner demanded that the job must be performed quicker, and Puig Antich was probably hooded, and the executioner secured him into place, and then began to crank the handle of the garrote behind. With each turn the iron collar tightened around his neck, and with each turn the bolt at the back of the device pressed further into his neck. It did not take long for him to be executed, and for death to be pronounced. The garrote for many was seen as a more harrowing execution method. There was another rebel at the time who was actually shot by a firing squad, which was seen as quicker and more noble, but many interpreted the execution of Salvador Puig Antich as a political one. 50 years on from his execution, the death sentence was actually overturned, and members of his family received a declaration saying that he had been a victim of the Francoist regime. But Salvador Puig Antich is remembered in history for being the final person executed on the garrote. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.